I'm Pamela Kirshner, Preservation Program Specialist in the Preservation Programs Department. And I have the pleasure of introducing Brad Lawrence. Brad Lawrence enlisted in the Navy and became a cryptological maintenance technician. This was where he discovered his interest in troubleshooting computer systems and developing more efficient technologies. After his discharge, he joined ITT in Dallas as a field systems engineer, which included maintaining computer systems for the city of Dallas. A few years later, he worked with Texas Instruments, building and calibrating FLIR systems, introducing him to the world of advancing imaging, as well as research and development. In 1985, he accepted a job as a video systems specialist on the Space Shuttle program with Lockheed Space Operations Company. With the title of Computer Science Lead, he now oversees the NASA Image Analysis Facility, Kennedy's Advanced Visualization, Environments Lab, and a motion capture studio supporting the design and manufacturing of the Orion space capsule. He obtained the NASA Unix System Administration Certification and has earned the NASA Spaceflight Honoree Award, Spaceflight Team Award, and the coveted Silver Snoopy Award. Brad has received 3 NASA Director Awards and the Technical Achievement Award in 2004 from United Space Alliance. Please hold your questions and comments until the end of the talk. And if I could ask you to please fill out your evaluation forms before the end and turn those in, that we would really appreciate that. So I'll bring Brad up. Thank you.
Thank you for y'all's allowing me to come here and speak today, and I want to appreciate the National Archives for giving us this opportunity. Been great hostesses. Again, name's Brad Lawrence, and I've been running the Imagery Lab up to Kennedy Space Center, where we do a lot of the processing. What I plan on doing today is kind of walking you through our organization, what we collected, how we collected it, what our purposes were with it. The organization was made up of a group of engineers. A lot of times I called it the ARC because we'd get 2 thermal protection engineers, 2 pyrotechnic engineers. Everybody came in twos into the lab screening room for us. We started off collecting on the launch pad for the final inspection team, which was a group of 6 of us that go out, 6 to 7 of us that go out just prior to the shuttle launch to do once the tank is filled, to actually do the inspection to make sure there's no things that are out of the ordinary, out of family as we call it. We collected content of the vehicle configuration during the processing flow. As things get put together, they would be documented. At first it was film, then it slowly moved into a combination of film and digital, and then at one point it was actually film being digitized into digital, and then at the end of the program it went strictly to digital. We'd also do pre-loading inspections as the fuel is loaded, as the pyrotechnics were charged. Those activities would be documented. The ice frost consoles, like I said, the ice debris team was the main capture or customer of all this imagery, and a lot of the activities during the launch count itself would be happening at the ice frost consoles for debris characterization. The launch imagery itself, which I'm going to go into a little bit more in depth here in a second, and then post-launch inspections, what were the damages, what are we going to have to fix or repair now that after this launch has happened, and then on landing. Landing went fairly quickly for us because it was just one object coming in. The sources of our imagery were a lot of it to deal with motion during launch. As you know, launch is a temporal event, so we had a lot of motion. 13 NTSC cameras would be being recorded with a qubit type recorder, which is a wavelet compression. We learned that the wavelet compression was kind of our favorite because we could tune it to the signal to noise ratio of the camera that it was capturing. That way we didn't lose any of the data that's being provided to us. there was actually over 70 cameras around the launch pad that were doing this type of format recording, but a lot of them were looking at analog gauges. So they were being fed into the firing room in real time so folks could just view what the pressure was or situations were. They weren't actually, we weren't really concerned about them during the launch count itself. There was also at the end 26 high definition cameras. We ended up choosing a 720 progressive format at the time, and we did make them go 60 frames a second. If you're familiar with HD, most of the broadcast is 59.94. We're engineers, we didn't really want to do all that math, so we made them 60 on the nose. We had a lot of 16 millimeter cameras, which are in these little housings right here, little blast shields. We ran them from 240 frames a second up to 400 frames a second. I do have some clips that'll show you the reason that we had such a high frame rate to capture things that would happen extremely quickly. A lot of times you end up with one picture of one piece of debris and you're wondering, where did it come from, where did it go? Trying to triangulate its position with one picture just makes a long day. There's also 35 millimeter cameras around. They're more of our long range cameras, and that's what you're seeing here. This is a 400-inch focal length lens, and these are our tracking, bless you, these are our tracking systems here, and they house a variety of multiple cameras. They actually came out of old World War II gunner's mate seats, where a person would be sitting down and their foot would be on a pedal as they see the shuttle in their bore sight, and they're cranking these two cranks, keeping up with the track of it. If their data is being fed into a central location, if they lose track of the shuttle, they'd lift their foot off and all the data would come back to their mechanism and all the other cameras would point it back up into the area. Once the tracker sees it, he or she would put their foot back down on the pedal and start cranking again. So it's kind of a neat interactive device. So the 35 millimeter cameras, we ran those at 100 and 180 frames a second. And then we also used 3 70 millimeter film cameras. IMAX is 65. We didn't require the audio, so we used the extra space for imagery. Then infrared cameras. We had 3 infrared camera systems at the end, and that's one of the main reasons I joined the shuttle program. They took me away from Texas Instrument in the infrared business over to the shuttle program. We started off with film projection, and I see 2 of them just like that sitting up in the booth up there. They were a lot quieter than our older ones, but because we didn't want to hear the shuttle launch time and time again after all these films and frames that we had to review, the Kinetron were very nice, quiet units. But we went over to digital projection. We took a look at all the different formats out there as far as DLP and plasma, LCD. The one that jumped out the most for me was a liquid crystal on silicon displays. Sony calls them OWIGA and JVC calls them DILA. They gave us the best response for analysis and allowed our team to really get in and not be able to have the technology take over. So we weren't really looking at the pixels, we were looking at the content behind them. Kind of like when we went to scan our films, we didn't want the grain. The grain ended up being our enemy, and we could see the patterns of the grain over the content of the imagery itself. So we had to look at ways that we didn't really want to dumb down the picture, but we also didn't want to have to try to discern is that grain or is that actually, off nominal situation. So our negatives are delivered by the institutional contractor, and they were scanned also into 1080 progressive off a telecine unit. We called these our quick look views because we'd bring them in and the telecine was basically a real time, so if it ran 6 minutes, it would take roughly 6 minutes to scan them and allowed the team to see the results to go through, because literally we had hundreds of of assets we had to go look at, and it took us probably in the beginning 5 12-hour days to go through it, and I think at the end we were able to do it in maybe 3.5 12-hour days. And I say 12 hours because that's all we were legally allowed to be there in a continuous basis. The films were scanned and returned to the contractor. We scanned them in a sequential DPX file. We found a 10-bit log file was very conducive to allowing us to look at capture the dynamic range of film over digital. This gave us roughly 30 bits depth, 30 bits per pixel for bit depth. We very rarely had to scan it twice, like a half a stop up or a stop down, because of the, like if the launch happened at night and then you had the main engines go off, you got 3 little mini suns going there, and that really can oversaturate film even. So especially if we're looking during the dark, we want to see the pyrotechnics go off, we have to adjust our cameras at a certain, you're just going to lose something somewhere along the line. You know, the eyes are amazing. Too bad we didn't have something like that for film or digital. We ended up scanning them in DPX, but we put them out as MPEG-4 files because most PCs cannot play frames that are running about 45 megs a frame, and we were playing them at 24 frames a second with our systems. So that wasn't your average PC. The 16 millimeter were as listed 2048 by 1240, and we had about 8,000 frames a reel for those. The 35, we did scan at 4,096 by 3112. We had a camera in the umbilical well of the orbiter that actually ran 235 side by side, and this system allowed us to scan those at over 8,100 DPI, so that, or actually 8,100 pixels across. All the data was backed up to LTO tapes, and I'm going to get into that a little bit later with the network of software, but that was our way of collecting the 16 terabytes of imagery per mission, and it would get dumped off to LTO tapes for us to turn around and clean the drives and get ready for the next mission. We had a couple different naming conventions. Usually we'd start with STS for Space Transportation System and the mission number. Then we'd go to the camera type. As you see on the description below, STS 135, E for engineering, D for documentary. There were different camera types. OTV was operational television video, OTH, operational television high def. So everything had a little bit of a prefix to it for the camera type, and then the actual camera number. And then for the scanning, we use the frame number. For the analysis side of it, we would use the time that the event happened, and rather than the frame number. But the beginning all was kept equal, so if a frame popped up somewhere that we didn't know where that digital file belonged, it would guide us right to the location, and whether it be a frame number or the time of event, we'd know if it was original data or if it was adjusted data. So basic file processes. The NTSC and HD imagery was recorded on those qubits in the wavelet format. The signal to noise was again adjusted per the camera type we used. The files were transferred to a mirrored server, which we had at JSC, Kennedy, and Marshall in Huntsville, Alabama. The 3 imagery labs would review those transferred files, and then if any anomalies or off-family events happened, we would digitize that film of that particular observation would be put in the front to be digitized into the DPX format. We use the odetics protocol to actually control our imagery, like you would a VCR with a remote controller. And we fed them through what we call the Piranha application. The picture on the left is the imagery lab itself, and the picture you saw of the projection system, that would be our screening room that this lab's feeding into. Some of the things that the Piranha system allowed us to do is put an automatic frame. So the engineers were actually watching the picture inside the purple frame, and this would give you the hour, the minutes, the seconds, a decimal point here which told us if the film was in sync, if it was out of sync, if it was locked, and then 10 hundredths thousandths of a second. We would distinguish which center was watching it, the STS mission number, the actual launch count time period, and the camera number. All those would be placed on the frame as the engineers are watching, and something was discovered as off nominal. In this case, it was the amount of ice and the way it took a little bit of the foam away from the external tank. Then we would snap the image right then and there off that frame, and it would be logged as that time time of day. This is a little bit of a close-up of that same frame, and what we're looking at is the difference between the telecine scans that were done with a video camera, an HD 1080p camera, and our datacine scans that we did in a 10-bit log format. It really depends on the projection system how well this jumps out at you, but I think you can probably see a little bit of the difference between the two. And for our team, it was instrumental that we did do the datacine scans in the 10-bit log format to actually bring that detail out and allow us to walk through those 30 bits of information. We'd go down to the lower. If it was in the dark, we could bring the darkness out and bring it out of the shadows. If it was actually in the flames of the main engine, the exhaust, we could drop that down into the other bits and actually see into the flames. Here's the system that we're using. Some of the nice things about it, we could bring in any flavor of imagery that we needed. We could put it side by side. We could lock it. We could adjust the log-to-lin curves for us. We could show the engineering different disciplines, the imagery from different cameras showing the same time sequence. Here, the cameras ran pretty well close together. I see they're about 2 1/1000ths of a second off between the 13 and the 15. But it gave us a good method to watch an object, to watch a piece of debris go across. We also use CAD models, which is what we were really moving into. We were seeing less reliance on the actual imagery, the raw imagery itself, and we were finding out that we had more of a reliance on mating that imagery up with CAD. The reason being, it's kind of tough to see here, but these are 2 NTSC cameras that we've overlaid the picture. The camera is actually up inside this well right here, and there's another camera on the other side that's showing from the solid rocket booster. Because these cameras were only running at 30 frames a second, and an event happened so fast, we only get one picture. So with that one image, we had to try to triangulate the position of that object. Well, one picture, you just don't have enough data. So what we do is we'd put the 2 pictures up, and we would run a beam from the camera through that object and then go into the CAD world, and we could move around in a 3D environment and see that beam. Then we'd go to all the other cameras that didn't see it, and we'd remove the beam from those other cameras. So by the time we were done process of elimination, we knew our object was somewhere on the beam that was still left in our CAD model. So it helped us, triangulate where the position of the objects were. Some of the things that we're seeing now, we're using infrared imagery at the end. This kind of gives you an idea of the depth of how cold things get and how warm things get. These are heaters right here that were, after the Challenger, we placed heaters on the O-rings, around the O-rings of solid rocket boosters. And this is the external tank that's holding the liquid hydrogen on the bottom of it. Here you can see where some of the frost actually was coming through the eyelets from the dome heat shields. So what I'm looking at here is from -70 to +67 degrees. Here's a -71 to a +82 degrees on the same area. So we're dealing with some pretty good dynamic differences in the temperature. Movies, I'll get to that in a second. Future. The future for us, obviously, is museums for the shuttle program. A lot of our imagery has been laid off the original is on film. Probably safe guess is at least 90% of it's on film, even though there was a lot of digital taken that was taken during the last few years of the shuttle program. Throughout the whole program, it was strictly film. A lot of that has been going to the National Archives now. It's being sent up, the original master negatives. Each of these centers has a positive of those films that they're storing themselves, and then we were able to digitize from STS 114 onward that have been digitized into a deep sequential DPX, but they're loaded on LTO2 tapes right now, and we're trying to get the NASA community to have an interest. which I think you all have felt the same pain as I do with that, to actually allow us to digitize the ones out of the past and to preserve the LTO2 tapes and get them off onto a newer format. Everything that we did was saved to a hard drive for a real-time acquisition, and then saved to a secondary hard drive for kind of a nearline storage, and then backed up on LTO2 just as a safety benefit. What we're trying to convince the NASA community right now is to, put those LTO2s on a disk drive that people can, all the engineering disciplines throughout the NASA centers and science in general can get quick access to them, to build a low quality proxy like MPEG-4 to do a quick look off, and then to actually go into the DPX images for any type of analysis or research that they want to do. For the next program, the Space Launch System, SLS, that's being developed right now, most of the camera systems for the pad are all going IP-based. They're bringing those, the IP is really just the transport in, but they're looking at anywhere from high definition is their lowest quality, which is kind of a misnomer to me, dealing in film. I don't consider video to be high definition, but nobody would have bought a medium definition camera. So we have not been looking at film too much, but we have been looking strictly digital, IP-based for the HD, and then high-speed digital to help replace for the film. The big challenge that we have, though, is film comes into a nice little can, and we can run 400 frames a second off for 6 seconds out of 1,000 feet, roughly. You try to do that with a high-speed digital camera, you need a bank of hard drives. They have to be striped together correctly in order to get the throughput that you need, and then you come up, like I said, 45 megs a frame, you come up with a tremendous amount of data. What we're looking at doing is actually, part of my other work out there is with motion capture. Motion capture takes a group of cameras and basically calibrates them all into a photogrammetry is used to photogrammetric, there we go, world, 3D world. So every camera knows where the other camera is located, and you match it up with your design CAD data. You can turn around and collect the data and store that a lot faster than trying to put it into a image sequence where you're just dumping the data in. The computer then in turn can tell us instantly if anything is off nominal, and when the team goes in to look at the imagery, everything is already prioritized for us. So we're able to go in and look at basically like a holodeck. We can go in and look at a 3D world and see that imagery there in real time after the fact. All that is nothing, stored as ones and zeros with no particular format, but then the purists like myself would rather see that imagery. Okay, so now we've triangulated the position of an object. We've seen, what type of characteristics have happened of certain flight hardware. Now show me the picture. Show me the picture. I don't want to, I love computers, but I really need to see that, hold that picture, read that newspaper with a cup of coffee. So it's really challenging. You have a lot of different cultures. You have a lot of different age groups battling with this, so it's fun. With that in mind, I am going to hit the escape key, and I think I'm doing pretty good on time, and throw some videos up there while you have any questions. How am I doing on time? Do I got a couple minutes to? All right. So here's one shot that I'm not sure how many of these you've seen, but I've got 2 of them that I'd kind of like to show real quick to give you an idea of some of the dynamics that happen. From the launch pad, this is one of the solid rocket booster cameras, and you're seeing debris. Those are actually covers that come off the thrusters during launch. NTSC camera showing you seconds, 10 hundredths, thousandths of a second. That was calculated if you're running 30 frames a second at 29.97. you're not really truly getting that hundredth or thousandth frame or thousandths of a second correct. With that in mind, I am going to go to the next one to show you after it gets up there. Looking the other way. That's one of my favorite shots right there, just seeing. These were all beamed down live, by the way, from the shuttle as it was going on. And then this is one here, last one to show you. As I was saying, that's hours, minutes, seconds, 0.10 hundred thousandths of a second. You're seeing the hydrogen burn-off igniters go. What they're going to do is when the engines start up, they have an excess of hydrogen, and the burn-off igniters will basically light that hydrogen fuel so we don't have an oops day. And what you'll see is engine 1, 2, and 3 start up. The the oxygen is actually coming out, it's going through all these little tubes about the size of a pencil. And that helps cool the engine bell. You're seeing frost right now form on the outside of the outside of the engine bell. It's cooling those engine bells down so when the engines light up, they don't melt. Because like I said, these are hydrogen oxygen, 3 little mini suns. Okay, the hydrogen started, and you'll start seeing kind of an orange glow around in here right now. A little tough to see. Now it's getting brighter. And then main engine 1 fires up. That's your cue. Come on, you can do it. There it goes. Then main engine 2, and then main engine 3. Now what you'll be seeing is the speed of the exhaust is reaching Mach 1, and you'll see the Mach diamond start appear inside the engine bell as it comes down. Right there it is, the white. And as that appears, then you'll actually see a cone form down here. That means that the velocity out there is Mach 1. So then now at T0, the disconnects will go. Right now, all fuel is being fed from the ground in through the main engines and then up to the tank. Once T0 hits, the quick disconnect goes and back pressure then feeds all the fuel from the external tank. So it's really amazing. This is, basically over 400 degrees, basically less than negative 32 degrees with the frost forming. And that's the thickness of a pencil, those engine bells. So at that moment, I think we're right about, gotta be getting close. Yeah, maybe. There it goes. So with the film, I'm able to actually, you see it's starting to darken now. I've took the log to Lynn to bring it down because we're more concerned looking up the engine bells for this, and now we're more concerned looking at the aft section of the solid rocket boosters. But that solid chemical right there that's burning, it even wipes out the film. I mean, it's just so overexposed. Very little you can do with it. But with the log to Lynn curve, I can bring it down to actually see a little bit more than what's normal. A lot of the debris you see flying around is actually rust. Right sitting on the ocean, things rust real quick. So with that, thank you for your time.
Okay, can I take any questions for Brad here? Is anyone manning microphones this afternoon? Yes, okay.
Hi, Marta O'Neill from NARA. I was curious as to why you used the 16 millimeter, 35, and 70 millimeter, and what does the 16 tell you that the 70 or the 35 doesn't?
The 16 millimeter allows us to run at 400 frames a second to capture some of those events, where 35, if we tried to push it that fast, it would snap the film. The others are spatial resolution, where the 16 millimeter is up close and personal on the launch pad. The 35, where we're using like the 400-inch focal length lenses, and they were further away. The 70 millimeter was film that we never really wanted to look at because it was our big sky picture. And that's if the very bad day happens, we're going to need an overall picture to show us what happened. So thus for the 3 different formats. Well, thank you again for your time. Oh, wait, I'm sorry. Try to get out. Oh, wow.
My name's Julia Brennan, and I was lucky to have lunch with Brad. Would you tell everyone the story of how you got into this, what your inspiration was?
I was actually scheduled to go to Boston Conservatory of Music. I am definitely more of an audio than a visual person, but the few months before I graduated high school, I was watching a documentary of a group of folks. You might remember the band The Grateful Dead, and they were capturing the frequency of, or the actual, reproducing the sound of a pair of scissors. And they were explaining how, the theory behind it, and how they were actually doing that by increasing the wattage amplification of the recording by analyzing the bandwidth and the frequency response of the scissors and the type of recording media and the type of playback that they needed. And that part of the science just got me so interested in electronics that I ended up joining the Navy about 3 months later to get into the cryptological field, because as some of you might know, cryptology has to do a lot with communications and sound. So that was one of those eureka moments, I think we called it. All right. Thank you again.